everybody. This is Andrea Kanaris, your host of the All Things Social Impact podcast, and we're speaking with Alexa as part of the Early Career series. Alexa, rather than me speak for you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrea. So my name is Alexa Dietrich. I'm a social scientist based in Naarm in Melbourne, which is Wurundjeri country here in Australia. By background, I am apologies, I've got all my notifications on, so hopefully that doesn't annoy anybody. But background, I have a bachelor in social science, so very passionate about social research and collaborating with communities and grassroots way of working. And currently I'm studying my Masters of Development Studies at the University of Melbourne.
Fantastic. Keep you busy, I'm sure. Alexa, before we dive right in, I think it's really important because my definition of social impact does not always fit with other people's. So to make sure that the listeners today can understand when we're talking about social impact, what it means for you, why it's important to you, and we can go from there.
Yeah, perfect. I love that. Love the question. Essentially, I've been on a little bit of a journey lately to understand who I am as a person and what my values are. And for me, that's always aligned with social impact. I think from a very young age, I've sort of been very passionate about community, making others feel good and feeling happy. And I think that's that is definitely like an aspiration that I've carried with me all throughout my early career. So just by background, I'm an early career researcher, really working across multiple fields from the private industry to the public industry. And now I'm having a bit of a break doing my postgrad. So I feel like I've got, even though I haven't been working for too long, probably over close to 4 years in the field now, I have quite a bit of experience in various fields. So from probation work to social impact to social planning and government and agency work. And I feel like across all those sectors, you can see social impact. So for me, it's very individual and it's really based on how a person experiences social impact and how they understand it. So I think in short, social impact's really complex, and I think it really does depend on the context and where you're located and what's impactful for you.
Fantastic. I would agree with all of that definition. I think you and I align in terms of it's a very broad concept and it can be very specific in times, i.e. the social impact assessment has a very specific meaning. But I think it's also a lot more complex and it happens in not-for-profits and private sectors and all sorts of places. In terms of what attracted you, and you kind of alluded to it, it's a value-based decision for you. I'd like to elaborate on what attracted you to social impact as a career option?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll be completely candid and honest.
Yes.
I jumped straight into my undergraduates and my uni degree right after I graduated from uni, and I had absolutely zero clue on what I wanted to do. Remember, because I'm from Queensland originally, and I grew up in Brisbane and in Meanjin, which is Yagara and Turrbal country. And I finished uni at 17, had no clue what I wanted to do, and had various options on, so I had performing arts, I had international studies, I had biomedical science, but I picked international studies at UQ because I thought, at University of Queensland, because I thought the campus was really pretty. And so it just happened to turn out that I fell into social science and development studies and really felt passionate about how communities and how societies develop and how they understand social impacts, just because I think when you look at it on a broader scale, there are a lot of societal issues, but then on the sort of micro versus macro level, definitely in the micro, there are different understandings of social impact and issues as well. And I think I went through my degree not knowing what I was doing, but I found that social research and actually working with communities was how I felt I was making an impact. Because I think a very big stigma that social scientists and social researchers and people from that social sort of background go through, it's sort of like, well, what are you going to do with that? And that's something that I was battling a lot in my undergraduate degree. So it was just very fortunate that I met you through my third year uni course and was able to secure a role at an environmental and planning consulting firm, and I felt that that was really up my alley, even though it maybe didn't really suit what I wanted to do. It was still a very good experience. But yeah, does that sort of answer the question?
There's no right or wrong answers there. So it's really just a conversation about your experience. And
Yeah.
what I picked up on there was resonated with me, and I think it will with a lot of people listening, that we don't always know what we want to do when we start university. I know that when I finished school, I didn't even go straight to university. I had a couple of other prior lives before my social impact world, and when I studied like you at the University of Queensland, but I did the social science degree and then did the postgrad in social planning and development, which doesn't exist anymore, in international development. But I had no idea, and I fell into social impact. I didn't even know it existed. It was an introduction through university as well. I think there will be a lot of people who that resonates with. There's a value system, there's things that you're kind of interested in, but you don't always know. I know there's some of those people who are lucky enough to know very young what they want to do, but I think for the majority of us, I think we're kind of like, I'm not really sure. So that's good, because I think that helps other people feel comfortable with the idea that you don't have to know straight away. So you came to me, as you mentioned, in your third year of university. What was that like? What was your first experience? Because we were doing social impact assessment, and I guess if we can explore that role, we were in the private sector. What was that experience like? Trying to learn on the ground. You've learned, obviously, you come with a set of tools and knowledge that you've picked up at university. What was how did that change once you were actually trying to apply it in a workplace?
Yeah, honestly, I just knew I wanted, it was like you sort of marketed it as an internship, and I had never had the opportunity to get an internship or anything like that before. But essentially, I knew I wanted to do an internship because I think prior to my third year, I was very disengaged from uni. I didn't really want to be there. I was also battling with like personal circumstances and health issues, as you would know about. And so I just wanted to be there and have experience, because I think that was a really hard thing for early career researchers to have access to. And so jumping in to consulting, had no clue what it was about, and I learned very quickly that it is a very complex space. But I was very fortunate because this was back in 2020, so that was during COVID as well, I believe. And I was doing my honours at the same time. It worked out quite well for me, because whilst I was doing my honours, I was still able to work and get experience, and I felt that was very impactful, because whilst there's always ups and downs in consulting, which make it tricky when you're contracted full time, working casually in that role whilst also managing my honours research project was really valuable, and it taught me how to properly time manage and understand, deadline and project management. And I found it very beneficial when yourself and the team would say, this is our due date, this is when we need it to the client by, get it done. And I felt like I was able to do that. So I feel like it was a tricky role, especially in consulting, to sort of jump into first. But once you get comfortable, once you feel like you know what you're doing, it becomes a bit easier and different sort of challenges arise. So I'm not too sure if that...
No, I think that's exactly right. And what I find interesting, and a lot of people may pick up on, is that you didn't talk a lot about social impact there. It was really about all these other skills that you have this passion for an area of work. And then you get into the workplace, and it's actually about having to pick up these other complementary skills that are about time management and managing clients' demands and all these other things that weren't necessarily on your radar. I know they weren't for me when I first started. It was like, whoa, yeah. And I don't know about you, I felt overwhelmed. How did you feel in that point where you're obviously juggling university and you've got this internship where there's demands on your time? How did that feel as an experience?
Yeah, I think in the first instance, I was happy to be there. I was happy to get the experience and learn more about, what is social impact assessment? Because I did do a course about it, I think the year before my honours as well, which is how I found out the opportunity from you. So I didn't really understand what it was. So for me, going into the role and actually learning how it is applied in in not, I guess, the actual context, how we how we use the social impact assessment guideline and how it's all very specific to different governments. So up in Queensland, there was the Department of State Development and the Office of the Coordinator General, which I actually ended up working in for about a
Yes.
year. Yeah, so I was able to I used my experience from consulting in the government role to understand, okay, how does infrastructure development sort of happen and how does it proceed? And so that's how I sort of approached it, was that I was there for the experience, I was willing to learn, and was also feel like I was learning how to manage the client, the tricky sort of client relations, the government relations from more experienced staff like yourself and some of the other directors and everything in the team. So I was just happy to be there. I still had my honors going on, which I loved doing. And then I think once my honors stopped and I was looking for more full-time work, that's when it became a bit challenging for me. Just because, the nature of consulting, I feel like you always have to be billable, you always have to be doing something, and that really stressed me out because that's often not realistic when it comes to community engagement and making sure that clients understand the value of engaging with community and then managing government. So I was like, I don't know if this is for me.
It is a challenging environment. There's lots of moving parts in those social impact assessments. If you reflect back and you think as you're transitioning in, what were the challenges that you faced? So, and I think when we think of challenges, it's what are the things that kind of made it that you think if you'd have had more of XYZ, for example, more support, or what kinds of things from mentors, from managers, from supervisors, from fellow colleagues would have made that transition from the university into the workplace easier. And and I guess that's looking at all of that early career, because you've transitioned quite a bit from now. Like you said, there was the internship, but then there was the Office of the Coordinator General role, or the state development role, and you're now in Melbourne doing yet another role. So if you reflect on that first 3-4 years, what have the challenges been for you in terms of transitioning from study into professional environment? And if you can reflect on what kinds of things do you think would have made it easier for you?
I think that my transition was actually really easy because, yourself and the company, and I remember Santiago as well was really helpful, and working with Amanda was amazing. So working with people who are so experienced but also so welcoming and willing to share their knowledge it made me feel comfortable because, I was battling a lot of personal circumstances from, family to mental health, and also just general health, and, so it was really nice to come to a workplace where I was anxious. I wanted to make friends, but at the same time, you don't understand the nature of consulting until you're actually in it and billing comes around. So I think I was quite fortunate in that I had a very good transition. But from what I'm seeing now in my master's, because I'm studying a master's of development studies, and most of the cohort are international students who have, they've either been stuck in academia or they've gone out and done these incredible not-for-profit organizations, but they don't understand, like what I find is there's not a lot of support and not a lot of people willing to show them what you're actually doing is social impact. And I think that's something that we need more of today, is we need more people willing to get into conversations with people, more people willing to put themselves out there and support young people to understand, professional world, it's scary, but there are options outside of academia. There are options outside of those main disciplines, because I remember when we would do the social impact assessments, we would often, research like job trends and employment trends. And one of the key trends I think we came across was that the rate of people who actually stay in their role long time is changing, and that more people are more likely to have career changes and have career paths. And I'm definitely seeing that today, even with myself going from graduate social planner, probation officer, social change consultant, all that sort of stuff. So I think there needs to be a bit more understanding and compassion for people who are still trying to figure it out, especially when you're 17 leaving high school. And I think that's such an important thing. And I think it really just needs to be about who you are as a person and connecting with people. And I think that's something that I got through through the internship, was that I felt valued, like even though, there were criteria to be able to get the internship, I still felt like I deserved it in a way. And yeah, and I really made the most out of the opportunity. So I think a bit more of that.
Yeah. I think they're all such great insights, and I think people listening will definitely be able to connect with what you're saying. I know that for myself, it's definitely been finding that place where you belong. And I think and you know me well now, so you know that I was not one of these people. I've said this, I was probably a Gen Y before Gen Ys existed, because I moved around a lot in my career. I didn't fit into that mold of get in a job and sit there for 15 years. That was never me. I'm a believer in finding the place that you feel like all those things that you said, feel valued, feel like you belong there, feel supported. And I think it's really important. I think that's one thing I like about the change in the work environment, that these days moving around is easier, and it's not frowned upon quite so much. And I think that's really important, because whilst it might be nice to stay in one place for a long time, and there's nothing wrong with that, if that place is not for you, or you're not happy there, or not feeling fulfilled there, then I think staying because you're worried that what other people think is not helpful. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but I think it's a trend I kind of embrace a bit more, and think it's a good idea.
But no, that definitely does resonate with me, because I recall your experience, like, and how you shared the work that you did with Queensland Health and working with vulnerable peoples and people seeking asylum. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. Like, now you're like, that's the things that I remember whenever I'm interacting with people, is not their job status or what they've done or what company they worked at. It's their projects and what they do, and how that they feel it helped the community. So I think that's something that I've learned recently, is you have a job title, you have this there can be negative or positive connotations around it, but what are actually the on the ground impacts, and how have you helped that community?
Yeah, I love that. Let's delve into that a bit more, because I agree with you. Like, when I reflect on some of the jobs that I've done, one of the jobs that stick with me the best, that I have fondest memories about, are the ones where I felt like I've made a difference. I don't know. And I think that's at the essence of social impact. When you feel like the work that you've done has had some kind of net benefit to the people you were working with.
Yes. Definitely.
So perhaps you could use that to talk about your early career and the choices you've made, because you've moved on a bit. You've made a big change lately. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that, and what motivated that change. What sits behind that for you?
I don't know. I feel like it's often like so many various factors. Like, very similar to you, I've had a very interesting life. Like, lots of things happen, and a lot of different life experiences, some really positive, but also some that are quite traumatic and quite hard to sort of cope with at times. And I feel like those things that I've dealt with have really influenced my learning and my understanding today. So when I say that I worked as a probation officer, I understand how that can be a negative, like, we see the faults in Australia and with the Australian government and our systems. But when I was working on the front line as a probation officer, I felt that connecting with people, so when we had caseloads of about 90 to 100 people, which is a ridiculous amount, and essentially these caseloads were offenders who we referred to as clients, who were subject to probation or parole. And so I found it going from consulting, so that was right after when I was working with you, straight into that probation work, which they called was they had it said it was a case manager role. I had no idea what that was, but social science was apparently a qualified degree for it. And it took me a couple of weeks to realize what I was doing when I was doing training for drug testing. And I was like, so that's what I'm doing here. And so I was so terrified. I was so scared. But I was like, okay, I'm here. I'm going to just stay in the job and see what I can do. Because, you know, I had my own issues with government systems, with prisons and everything like that. And that's just from my lived experiences, not me personally, but people around me.
Yes.
And so I didn't know how it worked. I found it hard to understand. And I was very scared to be putting myself in situations with people who potentially had very violent histories. But I was like, okay, I'm just going to go in naive. I'm going to see what happens and we'll figure it out. Like, I'm a social scientist, I'm a researcher, it'll be research. And it actually turned out to be like a really good experience. And I think having that understanding in development studies and social impact and working in consulting made me really manage my time and understand, okay, well, there is more to social impact than just writing social impact assessments for big companies, essentially.
Yes.
There is that more face-to-face client work, but also frontline community work where you can tangibly make a difference, even though that there are so many factors that limit an individual's journey to reducing recidivism and the rate of reoffending. So I've been on such a weird journey, but I've really valued it all, and it's led me to what I'm here, me today, and I can confidently say it has been very much so influenced by my community, by my childhood, by my life experiences, experiences of various health systems, education systems, and everything like that, as well as my education. So it's very much so, very much so. I didn't want to stick in a job and just deal with it. I liked moving around and figuring out what works with me. And here I am today studying a master's on a full scholarship, which is very exciting.
Very exciting. Congratulations on that. That's a
Thank
huge
you.
They don't give them out many, so you have to obviously have quite a lot of talent to be able to be offered one. So congratulations on that. This is Stella that's roaming around at the moment, and she's got a little sister, Stella, Milky. And,
Love it.
They're 2 years old now. I really like that story, and I think what's really important, when you're working with recidivism, but what I really liked is how you referred to your life experiences, and I think social impact in particular, and especially the frontline services where you're having an immediate impact on people's lives. I think the ability to be able to take those, particularly the negative experiences, because whilst they might be negative at the time and in the moment, they give us so much more insight, strength, resilience, and especially once you've dealt with those, because it's also a process to go through to get on the other side of it. But once you are, they actually become you can turn it into a positive, like you have in your work, where you're actually going, well, that gives me the ability to connect with people. Did you find that in your work with recidivism, that you were able to at least have a deeper understanding of what they may be going through, even though you can't fully understand, but at least you have some empathy and you have some ability to say that, these people, for whatever reason, their life has not gone well, and you may have thoughts about where they are, but you also can have empathy about, they still need support and they still need some interventions, and if you can help them be the best possible version that they can, or play a small role in them towards that.
Yes, definitely. And I've got so many stories from that are like funny and horrifying, but you can also see stories of clients. So that's how the department refers to them. They didn't refer to them as offenders or anything. We saw them as clients.
Yeah.
I've got so many interesting stories from that experience, but like the main ones are the ones where I've like connected with people. Like I remember one client who loved my tattoos. So like, I got so
Yeah.
many and she was
Yes.
like, I love them so much. I'm gonna go get them now. And oh my gosh, that's incredible. And like she was dealing with so much as well at the same time. But it just sort of grounds you and it makes you realize, okay, yes, we're in this situation that feels very sterile, but at the same time, you're there to try and support them access the services that aren't always accessible. And, you're there to analyze their situation and understand, okay, what is the best treatment or what is the best pathway to reduce their likelihood of imprisonment. And so that was really insightful. I was initially on a 3-month contract as well, and they wanted me I stayed a bit longer, but I also sneakily had another job lined up, and I was very lucky that the organization that I worked for was willing for me to work in government and then work for them because they felt this particular organization is called Morrowind. They work in like rituals of I want to use the terming that they use properly. So they're motivated to break cycles of disadvantage experience within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Australia. Very amazing company run by Dunghutti woman Carol Vale, who is very dear to me. She's been absolutely incredible woman. But that was the thing, was that I'd received 2 job offers at the time, and Carol and her partner as well, Greg, had offered me the job as well, and they said, you know what, you go work it at corrections, you'll get so much experience that will help you in this role, and then we'll see you when you're ready. And so I think having that safety net as well was very unique and very incredible, because I knew at that time when I got the offer from corrections, I said, look, I know government's really hard to get into, but I really want to work. Another thing about Moran is that they're a consulting firm. So I didn't want to jump right back into consulting. So having that flexibility and that understanding and that sort of faith in me was really, really helped me, because I was like, I really like doing case management and working with people. But at that moment in my life, I couldn't really handle feeling at lost when I was trying to help others. There were so many different factors that increased individuals' likelihood of recidivism. And so I was just like very grateful to jump back into consulting and feel like I was doing a little bit more social impact, or doing a bit more to sort of address those brighter systemic issues in terms of people seeking support.
That's a really interesting point, because social impact does happen at different levels. You and I have both done that client-facing stuff, or the frontline work, if you like. Myself settling refugees with you in the recidivism. It's a very different experience than addressing systemic issues through, say, social impact assessment or evaluation or policy, I guess. That it's a really different way of looking at social impact, sort of lifting up. And I think for me, one of the most rewarding, it's going to sound crazy, one of the most rewarding jobs that I did was the settling refugees, because there's this immediacy in the feedback, and you can see directly how you're managing to support them through particular portions of their life. But at the same time, I really enjoy the lifting up and the higher level. And it's certainly thankless in the sense when you compare it to the frontline facing stuff, because you don't always see the result immediately. How do you cope with that? Like, it took me a while to, like, that's where I enjoy, but I have to accept that I don't get that immediate feedback. That's my personal experience of the difference between the two.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, I've always struggled with like my sense of self and my identity. Like, I'm very centered and focused on helping others and doing the best I can. And if they're like, I would never intentionally hurt anyone or anything like that. So that's my sort of mantra, or my understanding of things, is that I just want to do the best I can. And sometimes that didn't pan out the way that I wanted to, like my role as a case manager in corrections. but I still took that experience and I learned from it, and I moved it on to my next role to understand, okay, like there's only so much you can understand when you're researching it on a level, like on that greater level. Like you really do need to communicate with communities. You need to understand what are their daily issues and what are they still dealing with. And that was something that, you know, really did pick up on in SIA, or social impact assessments, was that we do these environmental impact statements where we're working with massive consortiums of different technical professionals, like cross engineering, audio, and everything like that. And I think, like, audio engineering, I don't know the exact terms. Apologies. I feel like some people are gonna. I only know the social, but we would then get all that information, so these massive environmental impact reports, and disseminate them into an SIA, and then try and disseminate them into the community. And the community would say, we don't care about this, we care about our homes. When our homes, you know, tear apart, like crack because of blasting from local mines. Or we care about when FIFO, fly in fly out workers come in and they don't come into the community, they're just in and out, they don't contribute to anything. Like we care about the smell of a certain place. So you're probably remembering all these projects as I talk about them very broadly. And so that was something that I always felt up in arms was, is that it, like, essentially we were engaging with community, but it was very constrained, and I felt it was very tick box. And at that moment, like reflecting on it now, it probably wasn't, because we were still engaging with someone. We were still doing our best to work again in these very constrained timeframes that were set by the government, set by clients, set by the company that we were working at. And that was all fueled by billables and making sure that so all those fun little financial sort of things as well. But I think even in those roles, you can still really connect with people and make the most of it. So it's just about being resourceful and willing to compromise, and maybe being creative.
I think that's a really good point. I really like your reflection on that, because, and your insights about that, because I think a lot of people working in social impact are resonating right now, going, like, don't stop me, right? And I think that you're touching on something really important, because then it's a bit about expectations when you come into a new role too, as an early career. You know, when you're passionate about something, you want to make all these differences, you want to get and be able to portray the voice of the community accurately. And then you find, well, there's restricted times. There's all these barriers to being able to do it in, I guess, what academic terms is the ideal. And then the reality is you're trying to give equality and do all those things, but within all these constraints and managing the discrepancy. I really loved what you said. It's like the be creative. And I'd like to think that we were, like, you know, we were in the sense that where we couldn't fully do the extent of the, you know, on ground work we would have liked to have done with the community. I know we got really kind of like, well, where's the research around this particular issue? We drew on our social science research background to go, well, what do we know about noise and smell in communities, and how does it affect their health and their well-being? Is there something substantive in the research that would support what they're telling us? So we did get I think you're right, creative's a good way of looking at it, but not creative as in making up stories, creative in don't just rely on the one discussion that you're having with the community. Think a bit outside of the box of where else can you find the data sources to talk about the potential impacts on a community.
Yeah, and I remember we would triangulate the data.
That's the
a lot of triangulation.
Put a researcher hats on and triangulate our data wherever we can.
Yeah, but I truly believe that triangulating and getting sources and doing like mixed methods research is how you can understand community if you're not from that community yourself. So I think, it's very complex and making some very broad sweeping statements, but it's definitely based off my experience and what I've done and the opportunities that I've been afforded. But because I think I was so used to being an undergrad and people, engineers and, you know, teachers coming up to me and be like, oh, social science, what are you going to do with that? And so that really impacted like who I was and what I was going to do, but I knew I enjoyed it. So I'm glad that I stuck to it and I, you know, kept doing what I wanted to do. And here I am today.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I like that approach to your career where you go, it doesn't matter what other people are telling me.
Mm.
You know, I've chosen something. What are you going to do with that? You know, usually that comment comes around their lack of understanding
Yeah.
of what
Yes.
you do. But
Yes.
the fact that you've found this inner strength to go, you know, what's important is that I get some joy out of the work that I do. And I prefer that word to happy as well, I must say, when you say that, enjoyment rather than happy. Because in the social sciences, I said this to someone who was talking about we should all be happy in the workplace. I was like, oh, I don't know, some of the things we deal with are not nice.
Yes.
It's not happy to hear
Mm.
some of the things we have to listen to, particularly in, like you said, you know, things like recidivism or when you're dealing with people who've got torture and trauma in their
Yeah.
background.
Yes.
Um, I wouldn't use the word happy in those instances. I'm not happy about that. What I do, what I always resonated with me was there was joy to be found in the fact that just by hearing their stories,
Mm.
gave them some outlet,
Yeah.
maybe improved their conditions by the support they were getting through our program or whatever it was. I could find joy, even if I enjoyment out of that and some reward out of that, as opposed to thinking that every day is going to be a party at work and we're going to be having fun. Because
Mm.
sometimes it's not. Deadlines are
No.
not fun, are they, Alexa?
No, no, not at all. And trying to advocate for yourself and like the importance of, I remember
Yes.
that was a really big thing, especially when I, as an early career, like social scientist or researcher, was
Mm,
advocating for the importance of stakeholder engagement, you know, like,
yeah.
and comparing that to some of the other technical studies, like, yeah, like, you know, environmental research and environmental background. Like, I understand they're very important, but I
They
feel
are,
like,
of
yeah,
course. You know,
there was definitely, I saw a lot of difficulties for some like higher, like more like experienced professionals like yourself and some other people in the team who were constantly not only battling the community, but they're also battling like those internal sort of politics and lack of understanding towards the importance of community engagement and everything like that. So that's why I really, from experience in starting in that in environmental and planning consulting, is that I really do see the value in interdisciplinary ways of working. And there's
yeah.
not just one form of social impact work or social impact research. You can find that
Yeah.
across multiple areas.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think the battle that social practitioners or social professionals find, particularly those who get into social impact, I think, because you know if you're working in other areas of social, like the recidivism or where I was with the refugees, in that
Mm.
instance, everybody's on board. They're all doing the same thing. They understand the importance. But when you find yourself in a engineering firm or an environmental firm where you're not the core business, I think
Mm.
this is important for people to understand when they go into a workplace too, that, you know, you're not the core business
Yes.
and there's not always a great understanding of what you're doing. And you've pointed to that really greatly. We spend a lot of time sometimes having to explain why it's important. And I think a lot of my experienced colleagues out there will be going, yeah, and rolling their eyes going, it drives us insane. But I think what's really promising to hear is that, you know, this younger generation, you guys coming through, following us through, have are growing up in a community where there is more focus on social impact, you know, the
Yeah.
ESG focus and the S in ESG becoming increasingly a focus has shifted a little bit of that environment where there are people going, yes, we understand it's important to talk to communities. Our corporate social responsibility
Mm.
is important. We're getting companies, a lot less pushback from companies than we used to get. Now, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they have a full understanding of what we do, but it's increasing. The knowledge is increasing, which is a relief for us. And it's great to see that the generations coming through have a greater understanding and care for social impact, not just in social impact practitioners, but I'm increasingly hearing clients understand that it's important, starting to hear a lot more people in a lot different sectors understand that it's important. Like you said, even some of the environmental ones who sort of, didn't always fully understand why it needed to be done. I think that's shifting, fingers crossed, that continues. Because it's better, it would be better to use our time like doing the value add work than playing politics.
I think it's all dependent on context as well. Like 4 years ago today, we were dealing with, wait, was it 4 years ago? No, it was 4 years ago.
Yes. Time flies, Alexa.
4 years ago today, we were in a completely different context. Like, we were dealing with COVID. There's just so many different, our health systems were put under an immense amount of pressures. And now that we're coming out of that, I know here in Melbourne, it's completely different. Like Melbourne went through such serious lockdowns, but you can still see how COVID has impacted their health systems and just how people behave in public as well. So I think an important thing to understand with social impact is the context. I think, and also, which includes who you are as an individual, the policies, the systems, the structures, the organizations, and the people. And I think at the core of that, it's just connecting and talking to others, and it's amazing how much you learn.
Most definitely. And I think COVID was, I was against the COVID lockdowns, and my first reaction as the social scientist in me was isolating people from each other, locking them down is not good, and it's borne out to be true. Luckily we were in Brisbane where we didn't have severe lockdowns like in Melbourne, and I'm sure we've seen the increase in depression and in social anxiety, and it's definitely a side effect of the COVID lockdowns. And let's hope that we don't see a repeat of that.
It's such
but it was and then there were challenges with that, the working from home, which I know that a lot of people really like, but there were a lot of challenges with that for social practitioners, where talking to people is actually core to our work for the qualitative data sets. Us talking to people face to face, and face to face is king, like in terms of communication. It's great that we have these video conferences facilities, but face to face is always a better way to communicate with people, particularly troubled people. I find,
that's really interesting that you say that, because I was working as a probation officer and that was considered in Queensland an essential worker, and so I was still still required to go and report and talk to people, and which is really good to see. But COVID was that's what my honours research focused on, was COVID and food systems. So it's just such a complex, I think as the world becomes a bit more interconnected and globalized, there's a lot of issues that come to light that governments and people find it hard to deal with, I think.
I think so. I think, I think there's a lot more sort of microscope that can go on several things. And I think, the lack of passive exercise that got lost, that would be contributing to what was already an increase in obesity and health issues. And you layer that with depression, and we know that the physical and the mental health are related, and you sort of think, oh my goodness, how is this compounding on each other? But we'll see what comes out with that. But it was an interesting time for you, because you were entering the workforce in that environment, which was challenging, I'm sure. It was challenging for me as an experienced person. So how was that for you?
It was fine. I was just I sort of breezed through it, so it's really confronting moving down here to Melbourne and seeing how much COVID really and the lockdowns really impacted them. Whilst it was it's so important, so beneficial for immunocompromised people, it just highlights how complex the issue really is when you have these worldwide phenomenon, not phenomenons, I can't even say that, but when you have these worldwide like influenzas and zoonotic diseases that can impact supply chains, they impact food systems, they impact this, and it's just like, yeah, it's interesting reflecting back on it now and understanding how it's manifested today. And especially here in Melbourne, you can tell like social events, people sort of just stay still, they don't really do anything. And I'm like, that's how. And sometimes that's the thing with social impact, is
Oh,
that you
yeah.
don't know until you know. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that's a good way of putting it. Like until
Yeah.
something happens, you don't know. And I think that's an important part of social impact, is that it really
Mm.
truly is predictive,
Yeah.
and which means you have to make assumptions. And until
Mm.
it's realized, you don't really know until it happens, which is
Yes.
really why it's so important to have the ongoing monitoring and
Yeah.
evaluation of the outcomes of it, so that you
Yeah.
can tweak it, because you there's things you can't know. There's just things you
Exactly.
can't know.
That's
We can make assumptions of what we think will happen, but you
exactly.
can't know for sure. And people
Yeah.
are people.
Exactly. That's what I live my life by. If it
Yeah,
helps, I'm always thinking about the risk matrices and
yeah.
mitigation factors. So that's how social consulting is influencing my life today. All about risk and mitigation and
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So how do you, yeah, it does. It's not just you. I think it's a part of the career that haunts the rest of your life. Like, not
oh,
haunts. Haunts is
Andrea.
probably not the right word, but it permeates into your life. You
Yep.
see everything through that risk lens, a
Yeah.
little bit, because
Oh.
once you know how to do that, you just do it, and it's actually a good thing, right? Because
Yeah.
you're not going to do something. You'll have thought about the risk before you do something.
Definitely. And I think a part of that is the scholarship and meeting so many incredible people
Yeah.
through the network and learning about what they're doing. And it's completely different to me, but I still see the value and they may not be doing social science or social research, but I
Yeah.
definitely can still see the value and the passion of their work. And I think
Yeah.
that's like the core thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to be doing things that you're passionate about, for sure.
Yeah.
I think what's really nice about being in that situation is it doesn't feel like work.
Yes.
When I hear people feeling sort of like that talk about work in a kind of negative sense,
Mm.
I quite often think you haven't found your passion yet,
Yes. Yeah.
and maybe this isn't actually quite the right job for you. You're still on your journey to find that passion. Because I think if you can land yourself, if you're lucky enough to land yourself doing the things you're passionate about, and I think you and I have fallen into that. Like I don't feel like it's work to be doing what I do.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't mean it's not challenging. It doesn't mean that there's not hard days. But on totality, I enjoy what I do. So
Mm.
it's no big deal, right? It doesn't feel like a impost so much.
Yeah. Which is so lovely to hear. I'm so relieved to hear that. It's great to see all your endeavors and everything. And yeah, I'm definitely more keen to learn more about all things social impact. Put a bit
Ah,
of a
you
plug there.
will. As time goes on, it will all be revealed for sure. So
Yeah.
and it's likewise, it's great to hear what you've been doing and where your career is heading, because you're still in the early stages. So I'm excited to see
Yeah.
where you go. I mean, you've always been and you're resilient. I mean, where I sit here going, COVID was a challenge, you're like, oh no, it was easy. But that's just a reflection of you, Alexa. You always just embraced the situation you're in. You were resilient. You just kind of got on with understanding it, getting your way through it, learning it, and you're certainly a superstar in the making, absolutely.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
and if you could, so obviously this is the early days of the All Things Social Impact, and one of the concepts is we're talking to early career people first. So if I was to invite, you know, professionals, social impact professionals, into talk to me on this podcast, who would you?
Mm.
Is there anyone in particular that you could think of that you'd like to hear from? What does that look like? Is there people in particular? Or is there certain types of professionals, social impact
Yeah.
professionals, that you'd like to hear from?
Yeah, I've got lists and lists I'd love to
Ah,
like
you'll have to
send you
email them to
through.
you.
Yeah, I'd have to
Give
ask them
me.
first. Um, but I think, especially in the field of social impact, it's just important to engage with people
Mm.
across from diverse
Yeah.
experiences, life cycles. That's a bit of a weird way to frame it. But I think, like for me, I can engage with anybody and see a value and see social impact in their
Mm.
life, in their story, whether it's in their career or in their early childhood or anything like that. So I think that would be like the key thing is just like anybody that you think would be
Right.
interesting, that you think
Yeah.
young professionals would be keen to engage with, and everything like that, because you don't know what you don't know, essentially.
That's a nice way of looking at it too. And we really don't know what we don't know. So I'll keep that in mind when I'm tapping people on the shoulder and inviting
Yeah.
them to the podcast. And then I've got one more question is like if you only had two questions to ask somebody on this podcast, what would you want to know about? What would those questions be?
I think the first one would probably, I don't know if you've already, like, if you've already thought of this one, but like, at what stage in your life do you think you have, like, sort of enacted the most social impact, or you felt that your work contributed to social impact? I think that would be, like, really interesting. And then a second question, I don't know, because I'm very like people focused, so I really like, I guess, like the second question, because I'm engaging with a lot of international students who are finding it
Yep.
really hard to, especially in the development studies area, who are
Yes.
finding it hard to connect and finding it hard to, like, get opportunities and internships and stuff. So I guess my second thing would be like, what would what is the sort of like things that you do to make your work more accessible for others, maybe? They're
Yeah.
not very articulate. Apologies. I can send them. I can
No.
send them
They're
through.
fine. They're exactly the kinds of things that I think the whole point of having the early career, series first was to
Mm,
make sure that if we're going to invite, social impact professionals onto the podcast to talk about their careers and about how their journeys were, then how do we maximize those discussions to make sure that the early career people can learn what they want to hear from it? So that's the purpose of asking those questions, so that we can make sure that the conversations we have actually provide these early career people with the kinds of things that they need to hear. Because quite often we've been doing it for so long, right, that we can forget what it was like when we
yeah,
first started. Like sometimes, and
exactly.
this is the thing I love working with new graduates and early career people, is that it reminds me sometimes that the challenges that you have trying to transition and the struggle you have
Mm,
trying to navigate the world of professional environments, networking
mm,
and even just trying to figure out what your actual passion is. And like you said it before, like trying to figure out who I am, right?
yeah.
That's a journey that we're all on, I guess. But more so when you're younger, I think it's definitely in the forefront. So thank you for that, Alexa. It has been
No,
an
thank
absolute joy,
you.
as you always are. Right from the very first day, you've got
Oh,
this beautiful, beautiful way about you. You're extremely bright, and I'm excited. Like I said, excited to see where you take your career. And I thank you
yeah.
very much for your
Oh,
time.
thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea, for this opportunity. I always love having a bit of a chat and blabbing on about social impact, so it's been really wonderful.
I know it's been a while since we've been able to do it, and it's nice that we could do it on this podcast so that you can
Yeah.
participate. And it just seems right that someone like you, who I've had the privilege of being involved in their early career, were able to come on. So thank you again, and we'll speak soon.
Yes. See you
Thank you.
soon.
I hope you enjoyed the Full Things Social Impact podcast. You were listening to the Early Career series. Remember to like this video and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes.